Hey, so I just wanted to do a real quick kind of tutorial for a few things that we covered in Flow One last week, um, and just things that I noticed that there were questions on, or that I noticed maybe there needed a little more to be a little more explanation. So, first one we're going to do is downward dog, um, and this is a really a full body pose, full body move. So we're working on hinging in the hips. So we're not rounding in the back, we're really hinging in the hips. We're also looking at shoulder mobility here. So how high you can get your arms comfortably, just even kneeling here, without bringing the ribs kind of flaring them forward. So keeping them in. And you can test this before we even get into downward dog. You can find your neutral pelvis, keeping your ribs in, and then raise your arms up to the sky. And notice you might want to put one hand on your rib underneath your arm that you're raising. And then you're just going to raise your hand up to the sky. And the minute you feel your ribs kind of pushing forward, that's where you're going to stop that arm. So that same positioning is where you're going to end up in down dog. The other thing is that this is also a core exercise. So as much as we think of it as an arm, spine, pelvis move, because it's all of those pieces, the core is also involved. So I want to get kind of situated. We're going to start differently than we normally do, and you can practice this. I'm going to just scoot my mat. You can practice this just getting into downward dog and feeling downward dog in your body this way. And of course, when we're in like flow classes, there's going to be a lot more like a different transition. So we're not going to be getting into the pose in the same way, but this is a great way to practice getting into the pose. One more thing that I want you to practice to get into this pose, because what can often happen with people in downward dog is their elbows are kind of bent, or they're just not enough far, like there's not enough space between their feet and their arms. They kind of come into these like weird things with their arms. So I want you to bring your hands in front of you. And actually, first you're going to start this way. Okay, you're going to bring your arms into this sort of bent position. I'm going to adjust here so you can see this specific move. You're going to bring your arms here, and there is a tutorial on this, I believe, in the bonus section. You bring your hands this way, so your fingers are kind of facing each other. Your elbows are flaring out, and from there you're going to rotate your elbows in. Okay, that's kind of the setup to get into this downward dog position. So first we're going to start on our hands and knees. And okay, you can totally see me. So we're going to first start on our hands and knees. Now I want you to find your neutral pelvis. Good. So again, notice if you're super untucked here, or if your pelvis might be tucked here, and find a neutral. So somewhere in between untucked and tucked. Okay, good. Now tuck your toes under here. And before we even really get into the move, we're going to practice exhaling, finding our candles, and lifting our knees off the floor about an inch, and then releasing. So do that a few times. So find your candles here. Hover the knees off the floor and release. Check in with your shoulders. Make sure they're not up here. You're pushing your hands into the floor. The spine is not coming up, but the shoulder blades are nice and wide across the back. Good. One more time. Exhale, hover. Good. From here, remember that positioning where the elbows are wide, the hands are in. My mat is really sticky, so I'm not going to do that exactly, but you can try here. So you're going to putting our elbows wide and then rotate it, kind of slide them along and push up. Good. From here, I want you to bring your hips a little further back. So we're no longer totally stacked. Our shoulders are not right above our wrists, and our hips are not right above our our knees, tuck your toes under, find that same position, that kind of exhale candles. We lift our knees up. Good. From here, we're going to continue bringing our pelvis up to the sky as we push those arms into the floor. Good. And from here, we're going to keep our knees pretty bent. So we're not going to come into this straight pose here yet. Good. And then from here, find your pelvis again. Notice if you're really tucking or really untucking, and find somewhere in between. Good. So the elbow pits are sort of, they can't face out in front of us. This might be a little easier to see. They're kind of more facing each other, but that's going to help organize our shoulders. So let's try that again. Where our toes are tucked under. So here's the thing. If we're right here and we go into down dog, for a lot of people, that's just too short of a stance. So you can try that and see how that feels. And if it feels good, then that's all that really matters. If you feel like you're able to keep the weight evenly distributed between your hands and your feet, that's totally fine. Otherwise, you can bring it a little further. Both options are great. Try them both. Good. So our elbows are out. We rotate them in. We lift up our heels, and then we push into our hands and reach our booty back. Good. So notice I'm really not a super flexible person. So I'm not giving a great example, but I'm not like really dropping my ribs here. I'm still, because that would push my elbows or my shoulders out of the way. If you look at me this way, whew, if I'm really pushing my ribs down, my elbows kind of go into my shoulders go into internal rotation. I want my shoulders to stay in external rotation. So you might not get a lot of mobility this way, okay? And that's all right. We're pushing through our hands. We're bending our knees. We're reaching through the pelvis, through those sits bones. And then you can slowly start to straighten your knees to try and get those heels onto the floor. They might not reach the floor, and that's okay. Your ribs stay in. Ugh. Good. And then you're going to come down. So just following along with me just now is a lot on your shoulders and your wrists. So don't be afraid to just kind of take it really slow and maybe focus on one thing. So you can focus just on getting your shoulders organized this way and then popping into that downward dog. You can focus on just bringing your ribs in so that they're not collapsing towards the floor here, like that. You can focus on moving from bent knees to straight legs. You can focus on the pelvis and the sits bones and noticing if your pelvis is too untucked like this or too tucked, and just trying to find a space in between. So there's a lot that goes on in downward dog. Your core is involved the entire time. That's a workout, just that alone. So just notice that that's a lot. Take one thing at a time, maybe practice it a couple minutes every day, and then move on, or for a day, and then move on to the next piece. The next thing I wanted to show you was the high lunge. And this one's pretty straightforward. My head is cut off, but it won't be for long. We're going to bring our right foot forward and our left foot back. So when we come into these high lunges, what typically happens, I'm going to give you my side view. What typically happens is we lose our neutral pelvis, okay? So my hip bones are here, my pubic bone is here. My hip bones are way further ahead. So in order to find a neutral pelvis, we need to tuck our pelvis under to get there. Many of us are going to have a bent back knee, okay? Check in with that back heel. Notice what's happening. Notice if it's kind of reaching out that way. Maybe it's reaching in this way. And see if you can get it to just reach straight behind you. One way to do that is to really face those hip bones directly forward. Okay, so we're really working on getting that neutral pelvis here, and also both hip bones facing forward. Notice if you kind of want to turn in the pelvis. Bring it back. Good. That's going to also bring the work into that right glute. So right now my right leg is forward. That right glute is working really hard to keep my pelvis in neutral here. Good. And then you can just come up and switch sides. So again, your pelvis might go straight back into the anterior tilt. Find your candles. Tuck that pelvis back into neutral. Check in with that back heel. Really reach it behind you. That's going to help straighten the leg. But we're not looking for a straight back leg at the expense of the pelvis. So we'd rather find a neutral pelvis, drive that left foot into the floor, and have a bent back knee. You can work on getting a straight leg here. Sometimes if we're really low down in that lunge, getting straight is harder. And so just kind of coming out of the lunge up a little bit can be really helpful. Good. The last one that I wanted to show you is a calf stretch. And I was teaching this morning and I forgot my stuff. I had to grab it. Sorry. So we're going to come into a calf stretch. And this one, you do not need to have a half roller to do this. I would suggest having something fairly firm. So if you don't use a half roller, use a rolled up yoga mat, something that causes or gives you some resistance, okay? So whatever you have, bring your right foot to the roller, half roller, yoga mat. And so the toes are on the roller, the heel is on the floor, and the other leg, so right now my right foot is on the roller. My left leg is now going to, I'm going to show you the other side. So we're looking for a nicely aligned pelvis, right? We're looking for the pelvis to be right over the knees, and the knees to be right over the ankles. So as you can see right now, if I were to drop my strap, the heavy part of the strap goes behind my ankle here. So I'm just going to bring that forward. My pelvis is in neutral, and that's where I'm starting the stretch. My left leg now, depending on how much length I have in my back of my right leg, I might have my leg way up here. I don't, obviously, because that took me right out of that aligned pattern. I'm going to bring my weight back into my heel, back into alignment. And I'm just going to leave my left leg wherever it feels comfortable so that both of my hip bones are also facing forward here. So I'm not doing any weird twisting in my pelvis. Okay? And I'm just going to hang out here for, a minute maybe, however long. Okay? And you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Notice that one side might feel very different than the other. Whoops. Okay? So my left foot might have way less length in it, which in this case, I am much tighter on my left side. So my right foot is actually slightly behind my left, and that's perfectly fine. We don't want to have this be some really big pulling sensation that can cause pain in the heel later or in the plantar fascia of the feet. Okay, so this is a gentle stretch. We're not overly stretching anything. Now we're going to go into the double leg stretch. So you're going to keep both heels on the floor, your toes or your forefeet, the balls of your feet come to the roller. This might be already a huge stretch and too much for you, in which case you can bring your toes lower down and just not have your feet as high up, or just have a lower, like a shorter thing to use, like a yoga mat or something. Otherwise, you're going to find what feels comfortable here. And then we're going to slowly hinge at the hips. So notice how I'm not rounding in my back, okay? I am keeping my spine long, and I'm just moving my booty back folding my body kind of in half. Good. And then you're going to find your candles here. You might feel a lot of lengthening or stretching in the backs of your legs. That's the point. Good. And your spine stays long. So again, notice if you want to curl up here and see if you can keep it nice and long. So that might mean that you're right here, okay? That's perfectly acceptable. I want you to watch yourself so you can see what's happening. So you can turn on your camera on your computer and just watch yourself that way, in front of a mirror, something like that. And you're just going to hold it here. Good. And then you're going to drive those heels into the floor. You're going to feel the backs of your legs kind of turn on, like engage, and use that to come out of it. And that is the tutorial. Once you kind of have those moves down, I would suggest doing them at least 2 times before we meet again, and just a few times a week in general. See you next week.